But I have enjoyed doing collaborations, like with Charles Vess, Tom Snigovsky, and I've found that if it's someone you want to work with, it's someone that's fun, then it's worth doing. I've never been interested in just like, you know, I'd like to draw a Superman comic that somebody else wrote, but if, you know, Charles Vess wants to paint a fairy tale that I write, well, that would actually be enjoyable. That would be an adventure in and of itself, and it was. So that's why I liked it. And you guys collaborate like crazy with each other and with other people from outside of that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, collaborating for us is natural. We're always doing everything together. Even if we were doing things separately when we were young, we would like copy each other. So we were doing the same thing, but twice. So we started making comics together and telling our stories, and we started self-publishing comics together. So each of us would do a simple story and would, you know, talk about the other one's story, and we still do that on projects that we work separately. You know, talk about the drawings and, oh, you could do this better. But I think the most interesting thing about collaborating is that you're forced to do better. You have to push yourself to work with another person that thinks differently, and you know, imagine the whole scene, the whole story different than you would imagine. You have your own tricks, your own shortcuts to get one scene done, one drawing. You have your, you know, favorite angles to tell your story, favorite compositions. And when you're working with another writer, for example, that's how we usually do. He thinks differently. He tells a different story that I would tell, picks a different pacing, and I have to, you know, become a better artist in order to put that in the page. So I always found, you know, interesting. It was always very good, all the experience that I had and Fabio had working with other creators.
Yeah, but I think it's like Jeff said, because it's dangerous. Working with other people is dangerous. Because if you don't like what you're doing with the other people, then it goes completely the other way. You become a worse artist because you're not inspired, because you're not motivated. And so it's very, for us at least, it was very tricky to pick other people to work with, and sometimes it works well, some very little times when we were very young, it didn't work because we weren't ready, because it requires you to be prepared to think inside the other person's mind, and that's...
I think it's harder to draw something that someone else has written, or to write something that then someone else will draw?
I think writing for somebody else, it's worse.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Because you have to write so much. Like if you're writing for yourself, or if you're just reading, it's fine. You just have to worry about drawing. But if you're writing for another one, then you have to explain all the angle and
everything you want.
Yeah, but if you're drawing something that someone else wrote, they don't think about how to make your job easier at all. You know, like they'll make people talk in one order in one panel, and then this next panel they all talk in different orders, and all of a sudden you got to make like word balloon arrows. Is my voice going echoey there?
Yeah, I hate writers.
Well, those are technical challenges, but I'm interested that you obviously find solutions in other people's work. Whose work is influencing you and providing solutions for you? I mean, with Jeff, obviously for you, it's strip people and people like Harriman and Charles Schultz who did Peanuts. You can speak, Jeff.
Well, my best story about collaborating would be with Charles Vess on Rose, where we started the story of Rose, which is sort of like a prequel to Bone. It's the story of old Grandma Ben when she was like 16, and it's the first time she had to run in with the dragon and made some bad decisions. And Charles S. was visiting me in Ohio, and we were walking through this ravine, this state park called Old Man's Cave, which I have a place called Old Man's Cave in the comic book, and it's based on that. And I was giving him a little tour through this place, and I said, "Oh yeah," and this always inspired me when I was a kid. I always wanted to like tell stories about this place, and so that's kind of what Bone became. And I was saying, oh, and I always thought over there, that's like where Grandma Ben would have received her training to be given the gift of the dreaming from the dragons, and all that kind of stuff. And while I was just telling him all this story, all of a sudden he just stops and he goes, and this was just the backstory in my mind, you know what I mean? I never meant to do this as a comic book. This was just the story of Grandma Ben and how she screwed up and set things into motion that became the Bone story. Well, he stops me and says, I just want to paint that. I want to paint that story. And I was like, well, okay, great. Then jump ahead about 3 years. We go through the whole process of trying to write it, work out all the details, and there was an ending to the story, which if you've read Rose, it's a brutal ending. I wanted to go straight up Grimm's fairy tales. And Charles knew about it. I was bouncing ideas off him the whole time, and Charles has a great encyclopedic knowledge of myth and fantasy and fairy tales. So it was really a wonderful process of just bouncing it back and forth. But at some point, I had to sit down and write the comics so that he could paint them. And we got into the very last pages.
And you actually laid them out as well.
Yeah, when I write, my scripts don't look like a screenplay or something.
You could learn from this. You see, you don't have to write and write and write.
I'm sure they do. What do your scripts look like? Do they look like comics or do they look like screenplays?
Depends on
the project. Sometimes if we have to show the scripts to the editor, then we have to write more. And
I hate editors. One of my editors is in the audience. I love you, David. I hate all the other ones. So anyway, so I get to the last part, and it's the part where this is a very brutal section where it's almost like a Sophie's Choice. Rose she's made a deal with the dragon, and she has to kill, and this is a spoiler, so if you haven't read it, I'm about to ruin it for you. The dragon says, I will tell you how to save the day, but you have to kill the first living creature you see. That's the deal. It's part of the balance and the dreaming. It's the deal you have to make. So the first living person that she sees is her sister, who is the evil bad guy, and she can't do it. So she chickens out and decides, instead of killing my sister, I'll kill one of my dogs. And the dogs were actually characters in the book. So okay, this was the plan the whole time, and that's what we agreed on. And I was flying somewhere. I was going to a show. I was in like, I don't know, Singapore or something in the airport. And I remember finding the business office and faxing like the last 7 pages to Charles Vess. And it was probably the middle of the night in Virginia. And he calls me like 3 hours later, and he's like furious because what had happened is I chickened out. I couldn't have Rose kill the dog. I decided that was too harsh and that the dog would sacrifice itself, offer itself and sacrifice itself. And I could handle that. I could sleep a little better. So that's the pages I sent to him. And he called me up and says, "What are you doing?" He goes, that's not how the story ends. And I said, well, yeah, I know. It's just a little much that she kills the dog. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And he goes, she kills the dog. You're going to do it. You're going to redraw those things. And you're going to fax them to me now. And I'm in the Singapore airport, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I did it, and I rewrote it the way we had originally planned it, and I wouldn't have had the guts to do it on my own. If Charles hadn't insisted that this was old school fairy tales, and it had to be rough, and it had to be bloody, and there had to be guilt to make this. Rose had to make a mistake, or else Bone couldn't happen. And so I'm very grateful to Charles for having a backbone, because I couldn't do it. I was not going to be able to do it.
Do you guys have a story like that? Have you collaborated with somebody who's done that to you?
Ooh, well, not that dramatic. Not that dramatic. We are constantly complaining to each other because we work together and right in front of each other. So we always look at each other's work in pencil stage, and we always know when there's a lazy panel, when you were lazy or you were tired, and you try to do it faster.
Even if you spend 3 hours.
Yeah, you spend 3 hours.
That lazy panel.
But it started wrong, and it's crooked, and the perspective doesn't work, and it's not dynamic as it should be. And everybody who draws comics knows that, but nobody has somebody right next to him to tell, and we have. So we always do tell. So it's always, this is bad. This could be better.
That is brutal.
Yeah. And I think if we had tighter deadlines, we wouldn't be able to redraw stuff so much, but we don't. So we redraw as often as we can, because it always gets better. Even understanding that some panels, they are what they are supposed to be, and that's I don't know, a reflect of that day or that month or that period, because it always can get better, so you have to let go a little. But there's a limit to that let go. So we are always complaining about each other's work.
Do you guys draw? Do you guys like? I've never asked you this before, so I almost can't tell like if you guys draw on each other's comics. Do you, or do you like say, no, I'm drawing this set of pages, or whatever?
Usually we try to decide, one of us to draw a whole story, just for the style to be the same and the art to be invisible. But some stories can, feature two kinds of drawings, two sets of styles. And if that happened on that BPRD we did with Mike Mignola, where I do the more real world stuff and Fabio does the fantastic stuff. And
well, there's one story in there where you guys just both did your own version of the same story.
Yeah,
that was really cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's on Details also.
Yeah. That was actually a script we wrote for a friend of ours, and he never did the story.
So we did it.
We got pissed off and he said, "You're not going to do the story, you're going to do 2 versions." So you can see how it's just a matter of sitting and drawing puns, done.
Yeah.
Well, both of you, all 3 of you, I should say, have all worked in what we could generally define as fantasy. And what fascinates me is that in North American comics, 80% of the market is superheroes. And while you guys have dabbled in that with, Hellboy and with Shazam, most of your work has been horror-based or fairy tale-based or fantasy-based. So why have you guys chosen that path?
Ooh,
jump in, boys.
Yeah. I think for me was 2 things. Were the books that I read when I was growing up in Brazil, and also some music that we used to listen that were always lyrics, about people and how they relate. And in music, it's all very straightforward and more poetic. You can tell a lot with less, which you can't really do in comics. Not as powerful. If you want to get a message done, you have to do like Day Tripper, 200 pages, and not a 5-minute song. But you can do a very strong 5-minute song because you're writing poetry. So that's the kind of stuff that I think inspired us to tell stories, to reach to people, to inspire them as well. But we we loved to draw, and we loved comics, and we never thought it would be, it was, you know, something that it couldn't be done in comics. So once we started discovering comics that were more like that, we were more excited. Just like, you know, discovering Jeff's comics and all other things that were not as super. Mm-hmm. You know, that's it.
Well, while you're best known for the fantasy of Bone, to me one of the really interesting fantasies has been what you've been doing in Rassel. Because to me it is science fiction, but it's a couple of other genres thrown in as well. You're dealing with historical fantasy, some real historical stuff, and in a way this thing that I would call tech-noir as well. So tell me about putting together that hybrid.
Well, well, kind of dovetailing with your last question, I've found that there's, in fantasy or the fantastic, there's a set of symbols that you can play with that span whole lifetimes. So the reason, it's hard for me to put this in words, so let me struggle with it for a second. I tried to write stories that can be read as, you know, as a youngster. A kid can read it, but that same person can grow up and read it as a teenager or in college, or even as an adult, and these symbols should still operate on a, but just at a different level. They should still operate, but at that point the reader it'll open up a different piece of luggage for them, so to speak. So, and I just find that fantasy and mythology, or the fantastic, is one of the richest kinds of storytelling for using this kind of symbolism. And a very simple example of the kind of symbolism I'm talking about is like water. Water, when it's used intentionally in a story, represents the fantastic, whether you know it or not. Even if you've never heard anybody say that before, if you're reading a King Arthur legend and the knights are in the middle of a deep, dark forest and suddenly come across a fountain surrounded by 12 virgins, you know something's going to happen. Something good's going to happen. And what it is it represents the fantastic, something beyond our normal world, and that's because water in dreams means that kind of stuff to us because we're made of water, etc. Is that good, or you want to hear about
good? But it's funny because both Day Tripper and Rassel, to me, one of the things which is not working on a, well, wasn't working on a symbolic level for me, but I guess could have been, was this idea of being able to transfer from one place to another, portal stories and stories of alternate dimensions. I mean, why did you guys use that in Day Tripper?
Well, I think it was very hard to explain Day Tripper when we were like pitching to Vertigo, so it's going to keep being very hard, but it's not as much as a different reality, but it's how you think on the possibilities of something, and how to make people think about different possibilities while telling one big story. So you have to create, you have to make something break. If everything is very straightforward, everything is very normal, and Day Tripper is a very normal story about very normal daily lives, then people are more propelled to forget about the details of the story. So you have to make something break. And it's like when you're holding a pencil and you're writing, you forget about the pencil, you're only writing. You only remember you're holding a pencil when the pencil breaks, and you have to sharpen it again. So something has to break in a normal story. And it can be the way you structure the story, it can be something that happens over and over that doesn't happen usually in normal life. It can be that somebody dies and in the next chapter he's not dead anymore. And it's not something that you are going to explain, but it's something that it's going to make people think while they're reading. because it doesn't make sense. So something else has to make sense. And I think that's how we can work with the fantastical, we can work with the strange, is to make people notice what's not strange and to make people notice what we are really talking about, which in The Tripper is not about how the character dies, it's how the character lives, and in other stories it's not about how we draw, how the character, there's a character who meets himself in the bathroom, and it's not about meeting himself in the bathroom, it's about the choices you make and how the choices you make influence how your story goes next.